In the back. Yeah, I think so. They can actually hear me in Brooklyn. All right, Father Dan reminded me, so let me do the commercial announcements first because I'll probably forget if I wait until the end. So next week, Father Dan will be talking about the Spiritual Works of Mercy, and movie night is, someone please remember the date, movie night is in a few weeks on the 15th, thank you, and we'll watch The Mission, and I think those were the only commercial announcements. Let's start this session with a reading from Matthew. When the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the angels with him, he will sit upon his glorious throne, and all the nations will be assembled before him. And he will separate them one from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will place the sheep on his right and the goats on his left. Then the king will say to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty and you gave me drink. A stranger and you welcomed me. Naked and you clothed me. Ill and you cared for me. In prison and you visited me." Then the righteous will answer him and say, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you drink? When did we see you a stranger and welcome you, or naked and clothe you? When did we see you ill or in prison and visit you?" And the king will say to them in reply, "Amen, I say to you, whatever you did for one of the least brothers of mine, you did for me." Then he will say to those on the left, "Depart from me, you accursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry and you gave me no food. I was thirsty and you gave me no drink. A stranger and you gave me no welcome. Naked and you gave me no clothing. Ill and in prison and you did not care for me." Then they will answer and say, "Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty, or a stranger or naked or ill or in prison and not minister to your needs?" He will answer them, "Amen, I say to you, what you did not do for one of these least ones, you did not do for me. And these will go off to eternal punishment, but the righteous to eternal life." You've all doubtless heard this passage thousands of times. It's one I've prayed with frequently. It's one I talk about quite a bit in speaking to people. The theologian Michael Alms makes a lot of this passage, and it's actually pretty staggering when you think about it. Because Jesus is saying here what determines our ultimate judgment before God was not the kinds of things that we tend to think about, right? He doesn't separate the sheep and the goat based on what church they went to, on how well they said their prayers, or any of the other things we tend to talk about in spiritual terms. Instead, the criterion for salvation is, did we recognize our Lord in our brothers and sisters and respond to their needs? The passage could not be any clearer about what it means to be Christian and about the centrality to our Christian faith of what we do for each other. And it's this passage, more explicitly than any other, that is the basis for what we talk about as the corporal works of mercy, our subject for this morning, as we approach the last several weeks of this year of mercy. And I hope we all have some familiarity with the corporal works of mercy. We've been looking at that banner in the front of our church for the entire year. So even if you weren't trying, some of it would have had to seep in a little just from looking at it every week. And so what I'd like to do in our time together this morning is say a little bit about each of the 7 corporal works of mercy in the context of today's world, and then ask us to spend some time thinking about what they mean for us concretely. Feed the hungry. Almost 800 million people in the world do not have enough food to lead healthy lives. 800 million. That is about 1 in every 9 people on Earth lacking sufficient food. The vast majority of the world's hungry people live in the developing world, where almost 13% of the population is malnourished. In those countries, over half of the deaths of young children are caused by malnutrition. Those children that do live, if they go to school at all, attend classes hungry, their growth is stunted, and they are drastically underweight. The situation in our country is not quite so drastic, but still, 48 million Americans live in what are termed food insecure households, with children having a much higher degree and rate of food insecurity than households without children. That 48 million figure also includes about 5 million seniors who are food insecure. And at the same time, in the United States, we waste an estimated 30 to 40% of our food supply. Right? I mean, let that number sink in. Right? 30 to 40% of the food in this country is wasted. Not only could much of that food be used to feed the hungry, but food waste has an extraordinarily negative environmental impact. And I confess that food waste is one of the issues that is particularly troublesome several years in incredibly poor communities, Nepal and India. And so the idea that we just, without thinking, toss so much food is problematic. So what does it mean for us then to engage in the corporal work of feeding the hungry? Right, what does that mean? Well, the most obvious is to donate food. The U.S. Catholic Conference of Catholic Bishops, which has a long piece on its site about the corporal works, makes several suggestions. I mean, they talk about donating to Thanksgiving and Christmas food drives, which we do. They talk about researching, identifying, and contributing to organizations financially that serve the hungry. They suggest next time you're making a nice recipe of something at home to make a double batch and contribute it to a food bank. And I think all of those things are good things. I think we might also consider other things as well. I mean, another way we feed the hungry is by the consumer choices that we make, right? Do I buy fair trade food products when they're available? Or do my choices contribute to poverty and therefore hunger of farmers and others in the food chain? I mean, right, there's a reason fair trade products cost more, right? Because non-fair trade products are produced at the expense of someone down the line in the food chain, right? And maybe, I tell my students this because they all say they don't have money, but I see them with 8 cups of Caribou coffee all day long, right? I mean, maybe if they bought fair trade coffee, they'd have to consume 1 fewer cup of coffee, right, a day. We could all do that. I also think a way we feed the hungry is by reducing food waste. The USCC website says this. It says, try not to purchase more food than you're able to eat. If you notice that you end up throwing groceries away each week, purchase less and donate those savings to those in need. And finally, we feed the hungry by supporting practices that help people feed themselves, right? Absent technical know-how, which most of us don't have, that means contributing to the kinds of organizations that actually do provide that know-how, that support better irrigation, that support better use of seeds, that support all sorts of things like that. And so a wide variety of things that we have the ability to do depending on our needs, on our own means, in bigger ways or smaller ways. And let me make one final comment here on this corporal work of mercy, although it's relevant to several others as well, but I'll make it here. Although we're going into Advent, let me mention that, one of the practices we engage in during the Lenten period is fasting. right? And we fast for many reasons. And one of the reasons precisely is to focus our awareness on people who do not have what we have, right? If I voluntarily give up a meal, I will go hungry. If I refrain from the internet when I'm used to checking my email 400 times a day, right? I'll feel deprived. It may be voluntary and limited, but fasting gives us a little taste for what ordinary life is like for people who are food insecure, right? Fast from dinner every day for several days and experience what it's like to go to bed hungry, right? Drink nothing but water for several days and recognize that many people in the world don't even have access to clean water, let alone caribou coffee and the like. We fast to unite ourselves with those who lack. And it seems to me that kind of uniting ourselves with them is part of this corporal work of mercy. Second, give drink to the thirsty. And having just mentioned water, again, the statistics here are pretty staggering. 780 million people do not have access to clean water, to safe water. In developing countries, as much as 80% of illnesses are linked to poor water and sanitation conditions. Water-related diseases result in 443 million lost days of school each year. Half of the world's hospital beds are filled with people suffering from water-related disease. And in many communities, particularly in developing countries, fetching water can be a day-long affair. And it's usually the job of women and young girls who therefore are not in school because they're spending their entire day trying to get clean water. And again, I have particular sensitivity to this, having lived in places, when I lived in monastery in Nepal, we had to sign up for a shower 5 or 6 days in advance and hope that when your day came, the shower was actually working and the well had not, that shipped water up wasn't working. And I learned very quickly that you never put a toothbrush with toothpaste in your mouth before you see if there's water that morning. Trust me, it's very unpleasant to walk around with dry toothpaste in your mouth, right? And so again, the U.S. Catholic Conference encourages us to support the efforts of those who work toward greater accessibility of this essential resource. So they suggest on their site donating to help build wells for those in needs. One of the things that my students did this summer during one of their training days was, on really hot days, bring bottled water to homeless shelters, which is pretty simple thing. And also, again, to make efforts not to waste water. And maybe you can think of some other things on your own. Shelter the homeless. In the United States, over 500,000 Americans are homeless on any given night. Between 15 and 20% of the homeless population are what we refer to as chronically homeless. That is, people who have experienced homelessness for a year or longer, or who have experienced 4 episodes of homelessness over a 3-year period. About 8% of that homeless population are veterans, and each year more than 2 million children in America will face homelessness. Positively, on a more local level, homelessness has declined in Minnesota as a whole. It's declined slightly in Hennepin County, but actually has increased somewhat over the past couple of years in Ramsey County. And I mention those because I think that depending on where we live, it's easy for that to be an invisible problem for us, because we don't, depending on where we are, we may or may not see it. Now, obviously, homelessness in this country does not have a single cause. A significant amount of homelessness is poverty and lack of affordable housing. But it's also in this country a problem with mental illness and our approach to treating mental illness. It's also about teenagers that are trying to escape abusive home situations or gang membership. A study of youth in shelters found that nearly 50% reported intense conflict or physical harm by a family member as a major cause of their homelessness. And obviously, that's a very difficult, homelessness is obviously a very difficult problem to deal with precisely because it's so multifaceted. But difficult doesn't mean we're exempt from trying to do our part. So here are some of these things that the U.S. Catholic Conference suggests on its websites of ways we might engage in the corporal work of mercy of sheltering the homeless. They suggest volunteering some time in local homeless shelters, donating time or money to organizations that build homes for those in need, providing things homeless shelters need, warm blankets, personal care items. And it's funny, even when we do food drives, we don't always think about the importance of personal care items. I actually know some people that carry around in the back of their car little baggies just with toothbrush, toothpaste, deodorant, and give those to homeless people that they see. And what we do as a parish, what we do as a community, are other things that we need to think about. Visiting the sick. I come from a big Italian family, and so I always joke that my family has the whole hospital illness thing down to a science. I mean, we do 24-hour hospital coverage better than anyone I know, whether or not the hospital thinks it has 24-hour visiting hours. I mean, it's like someone gets sick and my family goes into organizational drive, and we do the same thing when someone's homesick. But the truth is that many of those who are sick don't have people to take care of them. It's funny, I had an experience now going back a million years, maybe 25 years ago, and it's always stuck with me. I was working as a young associate in a law firm in New York, and we had a volleyball team. And one night at one of our games, I, not very intelligently, stuck my hand up as a ball was coming and hurt badly the ligaments in my thumb. And after the game, the whole team and I went to Lenox Hill emergency room. And sports injuries at 10:30 on a weeknight in New York are not really high priority. The kind of gunshot wounds and car accidents take priority. So we were there a really long time. And my team stayed with me, and then we went out afterwards. The hospital wouldn't give me painkillers, so you can guess where we went out afterwards together. But anyway, the next day I happened to be in the ladies' room at the law firm, and a partner saw my bandaged hand and asked me about it. And she was someone that a lot of people did not respect, did not have a lot of people that thought well of her in the firm. And she listened to this story, and at the end, which she had an almost stricken look on her face and said, if that had been me, there would have been no one in the hospital with me. It's one of these things that's just stayed with me forever because, our own situation, again, is not always representative of others. And many people do not have someone to be with them in these kind of times. So what does it mean for us to engage in the corporal work of visiting the sick? What about spending time volunteering at a nursing home? Many people there have no one that visits them. Taking time to visit an elderly or housebound neighbor. I'm less experienced here, but I know with the situation here, but I know when I was in New York that many of the people who got New York City Meals on Wheels reported that that was literally the only person they saw all week was the person that brought their Meals on Wheels deliveries. Think about what that would be like. Offering to assist caregivers of chronically sick family members or friends that are caring for chronically ill people. As some of you know, caregiving is an enormously exhausting task, and even small breaks can mean a lot for caregivers. Those who are able, donate blood, right? There are so many ways that we can, think creatively about what it means to visit and assist the sick. I was thinking when I was seeing the last notice about the French, I don't know when we're doing baking pies again, I think not time soon. What if we decide as a parish that some number of the pies that we do, maybe we already do this, are going to go toward elderly people who, don't have the ability to purchase the pies themselves. Visiting prisoners. And I know you talked a little bit at the last Salt and Light about criminal justice issues. We have a prison system in drastic need of reform. On the front end, far too many people are locked away for extended periods of time, sometimes often for minor infractions. And on the back end, we have far too few programs assisting people in reentry after they've done their time and are released. In the words of one Urban Institute report, an increasing number of prisoners are returning home having spent longer times behind bars, less prepared for life on the outside, with less assistance in their reintegration, and at best, strained connections to their families and communities. And I mentioned this one, this category in particular is challenging for us because I think that prisoners are an easy category of people to ignore because it is so easy to view them as not us. Right? Those who commit crimes are bad people. They're not us. They deserve punishment. Helen Frazion once said that the reason she thought we found it so easy in this country to accept the death penalty, and obviously that's changing now, is precisely that we view those people as separate from us. And obviously I don't mean to minimize the gravity of crime, but notwithstanding that gravity, people who commit crimes are not throwaways, right? The USCCB reminds us that people in prison are still people made in the image and likeness of God. No matter what someone has done, they deserve the opportunity to hear the word of God and find the truth of the message of Christ. And I think part of what was trying to be conveyed in the sermon we did last week, in some senses, people are more than the worst thing they've ever done. And the reality is that prisoners need support while they're in prison and when they're released. And so we need to think of both of that. Obviously, there are local prison ministries that facilitate visits to prisons. We could volunteer to help out or donate charities that give Christmas presents to children whose parents are in prison. We can help lobby or otherwise support reentry programs for those who have been released from prison. And that could obviously take many forms, right? Helping people with resumes when they're trying to get jobs coming out, helping with other kinds of tutoring to provide them what we need. And in some sense, like visiting the sick, there are a lot of things that we can do to visit prisoners that don't involve cash outlay, because obviously people's cash abilities have tremendous variation. I mean, so does our time too, but the reality is everybody can do something. I once had a priest in New York who was talking about the fact that so many people in prison convert to Islam. And his comment was, who's doing a lot of the visiting of prisoners? That there was much more Muslim support in prisons than Christian. I don't know if that's true or not, that was his comment, but what are we doing to visit prisoners? The final one, I'm sorry, two more, but bury the dead. The USCCB website says this about the corporal work of burying the dead. Funerals give us the opportunity to grieve and show others support during difficult times. Through our prayers and actions during these times, we show our respect for life, which is always a gift from God, and comfort to those who mourn. And the site offers suggestions that I think probably are things we all do, right? Sending cards to people we know that have lost loved ones, helping provide meals to people in their mourning, visiting the cemetery. They also suggest, and I put it here because it was their suggestion, it's not something I've done, is planning your own funeral mass. But yeah, I haven't done that one yet. Obviously, the final corporate work of mercy, and then I want to open it up to some comments and questions, is to give alms to the poor. And again, obviously our personal circumstances have a tremendous impact on how much we can give. People in low-paying jobs, people on fixed incomes, obviously can't give enormous amounts of money away. But the reality is that we can all give something. You know, I commented before about my students thinking they don't have enough money, but they buy lattes all week. So, maybe they can skip one. I happen to get a thank you note to see my daughter made a very small contribution to her school, but at least it's something, right? To say part of what I do is give. And I also think part of giving Alms to the poor is thinking about to whom we donate. And I think there are sites like Charity Navigators and a few others that are really good at evaluating various charities and how you can get the most bang for your buck, because it does little good to save up all your money and donate to an entity that spends 80% of your contributions on their own administrative costs. And so that's just a little, and then as I say, I want to open it up for some discussion and dialogue on these. But I think that when we look at these as a whole, what they really do is give us a model for how we should treat others, right? Because what Jesus says in that gospel is, when you fed them, you fed me, right? And so part of this is, we've got a lot of specific things that we can do, but there's something underlying it, which is to see every person as if they were Christ. And that is really the fundamental issue. I mean, one of the reasons that St. Vincent de Paul is one of my great heroes is Vincent read that passage I started with, the judgment passage in Matthew 25, and he really took it to heart. And so a significant part of Vincentian charism is precisely that sense of seeing Christ, particularly in the poor and marginalized. But what we're really talking about is seeing Christ in every single person, right? And saying, what impact would it have on how I treated everyone if I viewed them as Christ, if I really viewed them, right, as my brother and my sister, right? If my brother called me and said he needed something, I would drop everything and do exactly what he needed, right? And yet, what Jesus says is every single person here is your brother and sister, and every single person you encounter is me. And so in a sense, I say that because what we don't want to do is just say, okay, here's a list of 7 things, and I checked off something in this box, I checked off something in that box, I checked off something in that box, okay, I got 4 out of 7, I'm cool, right? It's about a change, right, in an underlying way that I view people, so that I'm not doing any of these things as a matter of force, right? I'm not doing it because someone said I knock off 25 days in purgatory, right? If I complete some of these acts of charity, but I do it out of the love I have for Christ, because that is then what spills over into how I deal with everyone else. So, I think we need to think about this at the level of the particulars, because these are the things our church has said are our acts of mercy that we ought to do, but also to think about it from the underlying theological sense, right? That says we see Christ in everyone, and we see everyone as our brothers and sisters. I was talking with someone the other day about the Lord's Prayer. We'll be talking about prayer in our CIA today. And, when I say that prayer, I don't say Father and I don't say my Father, right? How do we pray that prayer? I say our Father. And that says that I'm acknowledging in that prayer that we say every day at Mass, and that's every week at Mass, every day, some of us, I'm acknowledging something about my relationship with each of you, not just my relationship with God. And that has to make a difference in how I think about all those things, so that they're not things I'm doing through external force, but out of my relationship with God. So let me stop now and open it up to your thoughts. Yeah.
Well, this is sort of an adjunct to what you just said about our Father, but in giving others, you don't have to give legal tender. I'm probably on a train and a bus more than any other person in this room today, and I cover a lot of territory, and I encounter people who I feel probably need some prayers. Mm-hmm. So at the end of my day, when I'm saying my prayer,
Absolutely, and I think you're right, important more on your mind, because even, I mean, it's the same as what we do when we talk about our contributions to our church. We talk about time, talent, and treasure. And it's the same thing here. Yes, some things I may do to help involve a cash outlay, and some of them may be praying, some of them may be having a conversation. Right, that looks like they need someone to talk to. So thanks, yeah, right.
No, I didn't,
Oh.
I was just, somebody down there was pointing.
Oh, thank you, yeah.
As a fellowship member of Gamblers Anonymous, I have no right to go into a prison because I'm a pen pal, but I will write prisoners.
Yeah, writing letters if you can't go visit, absolutely.
I get an F in seeing Christ in others, specific people. And so I want to know how, I guess I just pray for God's grace. May I give the example of my daughter's boyfriend,
Sure.
who is a felon, 3 times that we know of, who has stolen innumerable objects from her, computer, money, clothing, most recently. And it's really hard for me to not want him removed from the earth, I have to say. So how do I
Not just
get-
removed from your daughter, just removed from the entire earth.
So, really, I have so struggled with this because in my and she wants him back. So in my conversations with her, I sometimes try not to be unkind. I take deep Lamaze breathing before I call her. But I cannot put him in a spiritual lens. So is that a gift from God? I need to pray for that gift.
Look, obviously it's hard, right? It's easy, Carl Hauslander in one of her books said, it's kind of easy to see people as a whole, as people I should love. But we
Right.
all, let's face it, we all have someone, or maybe more than one someone. That's challenging. That is challenging. And yeah, it's not easy, right? But Jesus' teaching was not love the people who are easy to love. I love my daughter, I love all the people in this room because we all worship together, right? But to love precisely the hard to love. Yeah, and it is challenging to recognize, right, that whatever his faults are, right, that he is made in God's image, just as we are. And yeah, I don't think that's something I can will myself toward. I think there is prayer and grace involved in that.
I have to pray for him.
Yes, try praying for him as well as praying for some softening of your feelings, which doesn't necessarily mean you have to be thrilled and going out right with your daughter. I mean, those are 2 separate issues. It may very well be it's not a healthy relationship for her, but that is separate from can I soften my heart toward him.
Thank you.
A few things. One, I'm pretty sure we have done in the past that the pies have been used for abortion done that.
Cool.
Or if not, they've been sold for cash.
Great.
To support my food for some of the Feed the Hungry dinners we do. And we probably do a poor job publicizing some of those events that we have here in the parish. Encourage you, if you haven't done the pie baking, it's a good fellowship activity. There's a lot of fun that's raised that day. Getting messy with pie dough. And this is kind of some of the conflicts. If you ask most food shops, they much prefer cash than cans. I was just at a party last night, Halloween party, where they were giving discounts for people to bring cans and bags. And if you're going to do one of those events, I think they much prefer create awareness for the food shop and paying cash.
Yeah, and I meant to say that because I was actually just reading something about that the other day, and part of it is we were going to do something, for example, in the parish, to connect specifically with someone and say, what is it that you need? Because I have to say, sadly, for a lot of people, the food drives are what's in my cabinet that I don't really use. I bought it like 6 months ago, and this is a good way to get rid of it. And I used in the parish in my parish in New York, where we did Thanksgiving baskets for people. I mean, some of the things that were donated, you're just like, what am I going to do with it?
Well, the food shops have more buying power.
Yeah.
Too. So they're buying at discount rates
Absolutely.
and below those sales. So as far as being the steward with our resources, we're much better allocating cash.
But some of them also, and it's interesting, some of them, and the reason I say connect with them is that some of them say that things that they'd love people to donate are not things that we ever think about. Like spices, right? I mean, whoever thinks of that if we donate, right? We think of canned, or they'll say everybody gives canned pineapple. So, yeah, right, I don't know why. Some canned pineapple seems to be like the food of choice. But yeah, I do think that. If you donate money, great. And if we were going to do some kind of actual drive, it would be better to actually connect with a particular shop and say, what is it that you...
And what is the opposite? I've always had trouble just giving out cash to somebody that's on the street begging. So what I've done is I've loaded up my car with nuts, so hopefully you don't have nut allergies, but you can get Costco most
Right.
nuts. It's a lot easier handing out a bag of food that they know is sterile because it isn't open. And I just make sure they don't have nut. So that's how I've gotten over the fact of just handing out cash.
The other thing that I've done is gotten some like $10 gift cards from Devani's or something and hand, because then you know they're having a meal, and B, they're just gonna go be able to sit down somewhere for a little while. What? No. Okay. But
Maybe that's the street experience, they probably sold your Devani's card.
maybe. But you know, I've actually have seen people go in with those cards. Other people do. So maybe some do. But you know what? That's going to be true. That possibility exists for almost everything I do. And I think we have to say, at some point, separate that and say, I'm giving with the best way that I can, and there's going to be some amount of people that game the system and rip it off. But that shouldn't stop us from doing what we do. Yeah, other thoughts on this?
I think in her situation, up here in the
Oh.
big jacket, I think it's important to remember everybody has a different kind of backstory and a different experience that they've had in life. I work in corrections, so I get to see a lot of the horrible life or the hardships that people have had to go through that have kind of put them in the situations they're in.
Right.
So I think just kind of remembering that is helpful too.
Yeah. Yeah. Other thoughts? You know, I'm just passing out. This is always the Susan can't talk and walk at the same time. Just a short handout, and just send these to the back too. That just says, you know, as I look at these, you know, what are some ways, when I look at these things, what are some things that I particularly can do? There's more coming around here, and to think both in short term and in long term, right? I mean, what things could I do right away? Does people need more in the back there? So did everyone has them over there? Yeah. So what are some ways I might engage in these corporal works? What is something I could do right away? And what might be a longer term option? And so why don't we just take like a couple of minutes quietly, and then I'll ask you to share at your tables, which means a couple of you have to move because you're sitting by yourself. And, you know, it doesn't have to be 5. It could be 4 or 6, or 3 or 7. Take some time at your tables. And if you're sitting at a table with, like, fewer than 3 people on it, maybe you can, like, go someplace else so you can have a better discussion. And to share a little bit both your sense of how you might live this out and what is challenging? Where is the particular challenge for you in, as I said, doing this out of a sense of seeing Christ in everyone? I don't have people there. Okay. Why don't you guys go to this table? Why don't you two come here so that you've got a... So let's talk about what came out of your table discussion, either in terms of some concrete individual or parish step or a challenge. What about these guys over here, your table?
Well, I guess we talked about
going out and looking for an opportunity sometimes is a little challenging, and we're blessed here at Our Lady of Lourdes because just open up and look at the bulletin. We're, lots of opportunity, dinner for the hungry is coming up. If you can't make it that day, you can take home brownies and bake them and bring them back. And I was sharing too that now our church envelopes, instead of saying feed the hungry, it's also justice and charity. And it's the policy of Our Lady of Lourdes, if we over the year take in $10,000 worth of donations for justice and charity and feed the hungry, then we make sure that that's what goes out, whether it's providing the dinner for the hungry, the cost of that meal, or now we're sharing and carrying hands, we give money to the Oblate Mission, and so what goes in does go out. So that makes it a little easier for us, just because there are opportunities right in our own
Sure.
parish.
Sure. Others, concrete steps or challenges, either way. Yeah.
You talked a little bit about having a change in life. So I just graduated from college, so I'm kind of in this transition where it's like, I used to have hardly any money, but now I'm working full time, and like I have my nights and weekends pretty free. So it's like this weird time where I have to really reevaluate like what's going on. Like,
Yeah.
oh, I don't have to do homework on Sunday. Like I can like go do other stuff. So just like reevaluating, like okay, I have more time to volunteer after work, and I have like more money to donate. So just like making sure that I'm diligent in like giving what I can and not just sticking with the status quo. That was what it was when I was.
Great. Yeah, right, because it's a time for real intentionality, because otherwise all that time will fill up with something. The question is it going to just fill up willy-nilly, or is it going to fill up with some intentionality on your part as to how to use it? Thanks. Others? Yeah.
And we discussed, there's three areas of people that we know and don't know, those that we encounter, those that we don't encounter, that are faceless, and those that are in between. And sometimes it's easy to write a check for those that are faceless. It's difficult to ritualize our behavior so that we can actually encounter people. And sometimes we can't encounter people because of the daily life that we live. And so maybe we would, there's some that would give a gift of prayer.
Yeah, and obviously there's obviously the financial needs are enormous, but there are ways that I can give that don't require writing a check, and that maybe take a little more from some of us. It actually maybe takes more effort to do something that's other than write a check, because that's that's a little easy, right?
Because it's not part of your ritual life.
Right. Yeah. And so how do I intentionally make something then part of my life? Others? Yeah. Right.
One thing I mentioned was everybody has probably more stuff than they need, and they can either sell it and contribute or give it to somebody like St. Vincent de Paul, let them sell it, and they provide the service. Now, so I volunteer a couple days a week at the VA hospital, visiting patients. But they do all kinds of other, there are like 2,000 volunteers
Wow.
at the VA hospital, which is one of the biggest in the country. They're doing all kinds of stuff. They do administrative work, and I'm not even sure what else they do, but I'm just really chaplain service. But that's something that we could always use somebody like that, men and women. Most of the patients are men, but it'll become more and more women in the next years coming up. But
Yeah, I think that's right.
that's something they can use help.
Yeah. And part of it maybe there's someone that never occurred to them that was a volunteer opportunity. And one of the advantages, as Deb says, of having some of these things available, of maybe we can even do a better job maybe on our website of having, here are some different volunteer opportunities, because some people may not do it just because it doesn't occur to them that.
Yeah.
Some people have varying levels of knowledge of what the possibilities
And you could actually
are.
invite a friend to go with you volunteer.
Absolutely.
The cartoon Zits, Jeremy didn't want to do that this week, and his girlfriend got him to the shelter to play with kids. So and a lot of times people don't think about it, or it's out of their comfort zone, but if you have direct invitation.
There you go, Ray. Make sure you take someone with you next time.
That's a possibility.
Yeah. Right?
And then actually, we could have somebody in the parish be responsible for assembling lists of, this, people are needed here.
Yeah.
And I'll think about that, maybe it's something.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, that's the encouragement, right, to think not only what can I do individually, but, in a parish that, and as Deb says, it's not that we're a parish that is not doing anything. We do some things, but are there more things that we can do? And maybe part of it is, can we just be a better clearinghouse for information for parishioners? Cool.
One topic
Yeah.
that I haven't heard mentioned yet, I volunteer at People Serving People, which is the family homeless shelter on the other side of the river. And their big need constantly is diapers.
Is diapers, yeah.
The toddlers over there, the preschool kids taught me how to do the Whip Nay Nay song, which horrified my daughter that was out there doing this. But it is a wonderful volunteer opportunity.
Yeah.
Everything from food service to childcare to helping people write resumes. So that's another option. We've got a lot of great ones.
Yeah, and as long as you mention that, it's another good thing to mention. In the category of things we don't often think about, there is a group here called Diaper Bank in Minnesota, because I don't think we always think about how for poor people, diapers are a major issue, right? And you have people in the community with babies that are trying to literally reuse disposable diapers, or right, those of us who have been mothers, right, or leave them on way longer than they should, because diapers are expensive. And I could afford, when Elena was a toddler, to go to Costco or BJ's, but you have to have enough cash to be able to go buy the bulk things that are less expensive. And if you don't have that cash and you're going to the corner bodega, right, to buy your disposable diapers, they're really expensive. So they're actually, I think it's called Diaper Bank Minnesota, that collects donations of diapers or cash for diapers. They just had a big fundraising in September. But I think that's another one of those things in the category of things that we don't tend to think about, but is a real need. So yeah, I would just encourage you to continue to spend time thinking, both individually and at a communal level, and also, to think about where are the challenges for you. And maybe part of it is, there are some people I just have real difficulty seeing Christ in. And so what's my then prayer response to that? How am I working to overcome the feelings that make it more difficult for me to exercise these works of charity with certain groups? So thank you, and keep thinking about these issues. Yep.